I'll look for a long.
Market is open.
Offer trap 350. Bottom bid propping at 348 though. Fif- 352 offer trap, huge one. I want to get my long average at the 330s, so I want it to dump. Lag being total POS. Offer trap at 346. Bouncing from that J lines. Nice. Okay. Dumping 330s. Okay, I longed it here. Risking 330s. Average 339, I think. Let me see. 339. I lag squeezing. Five oh six. Bid prop there at 344. Good amount of absorbing here at the J lines. Okay, back to that 340s. Let's see.
Yeah, it is Cody.
FFIE micro gapping. Bid prop 345. Nice. I skip up. That portion didn't have any follow through though, so looking kind of weak there. Actually looked really weak there. That was a really good stuff. Dang. That was a really good stuff.
Oh, bruh.
Are you dead? Let's see. They could still be trapping here. I actually want that, where they put it below VWAP and all of that shelf. There's a demand zone there from that pre-market, so let's see. I might add here. Okay, added another. Average is 336 now. Offer trap 334. FFIE. Dumping. Dang, should have shorted you.
EVTL, nice as well. Weakness run on the open.
Which one?
EVTL.
Oh, okay. Floor looks like could dump more. Really struggling there. Come on. There you go. There you go. Man, that was stupid weak. Okay. Lag's doing a shelf now. Okay, there's the weakness. Goodbye. Dump more. There you go. There you go. What are you guys watching?
Yeah.
The end?
I got into QD when I went to view up.
Nice. Let me look at that.
I think it's one of those. It's like a Chinese stock.
Yeah, it is. I can't. I have no data on it, so
Yeah,
I can't trade it.
it's all good.
Oh, did you get? So, what's your average on that, Christian?
195.
Bro, that's
It's like
freaking
around.
awesome.
Yeah, it was so
That's
weird.
good.
Like it just like from VWAP to the 5 minute J lines, it was just straight down.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Thank you.
You're really. I'm really liking your entries these days, Christian.
Thank you.
Are you gonna switch? You should switch to a live account soon if you keep doing that, bro.
Yeah, let's see this month. Like I want to get more confident.
That's good. That's good. Anyways, I'm risking 320s on ADN. I don't think it'll go down that far, but if it does, I'll just get out.
QD had a very huge volume at the open.
QD?
Well, yeah. Well, on 15 it traded over 10 million and normally mostly selling and only dumped what 20 cents. Then reclaimed it.
Yeah, I think they're accumulating shares here.
Oh,
Let's go. Maybe I'm gonna add another more. Just needs to dump a little bit more. I'll just long it.
You know, like in my mind, when it, you know, for QD, like in my mind, like when it went from VWAP to the 5 minute J line in such a like dumpy manner, I was like, is this the kind of stock where it's just gonna go straight down the whole time? But now I'm having second thoughts, cause yeah, it might be accumulating.
Oh, I'm saying that for ADN though. For QD,
About what Max said,
oh, okay.
like on one of the like the older days, like it didn't like
You
an
have
accumulation.
188 though to help you if it does go up. It could reject there if it
Yeah,
meets it there.
yeah.
You just don't want to see any follow through buying.
Mhm.
That's why you actually saw an ADN, and I guess we can take a look at that later. On that stuff move, it pushed up, and then it did one last spread of purple orders, but then it didn't do squat. So that was probably the best time to short.
Yeah.
There you go. Let's go. There's that push up. Now we need follow through of buying. Offer trap at 339. Jose? No follow through of buying. That was a good bid prop there.
Same here, Cody. Love to see it go 4.
Hey, nice. That's what we all want. What are you thinking of getting into? Like what price, Cody, if it goes up? And Mac, what do you think? Where do you want to go up?
I would definitely have a look at 360. And then, yeah, and then probably 4.
Cool, cool. What are you gonna do? That looks weak right now.
Yeah, man, that 340 may have been a good JLR.
Yeah. This looks like a floor now. 328. Okay, okay. Okay, not okay. I can see them doing like a fake breakdown and then maybe pushing it up now. Pushing it up then, I mean. Here's the floor breaking. And there's the reclaim. Okay, let's see. Get back up to 328. There it is. There's the fake breakdown. Haha! Look at that. Now it needs to follow through. Let's go break that VWAP. Really trying to absorb that. It's starting to get pretty. Actually, hold on. Yeah, there it is. There's the skip to the AA. Now we need follow through of green. Okay, there you go. There you go. Okay, where was that? There. Really struggling to there VWAP, but it's sticking there. It's hugging that VWAP now. So, not quite weak yet. Kind of. Maybe I spoke too soon this time. The buyer did step up though, I think.
Yeah, there was a big tape is more on the buy side.
We just need more follow through, but right now, we'll see. Once it breaks that VWAP, I'll be sitting comfortably. Just really struggling to find some demand here. There you go. There's the AA orders.
I think as long as it holds that 330 should be okay.
Mark, can't they just push it with A orders and then once it's over, like the VWAP, like more buyers are gonna come in?
They could. That's what I'm hoping for, actually.
So like, that's why. Wait, maybe they're gonna trap it instead.
Really, I never really know when they're gonna start doing it, but from just the way that they've been holding that 320s,
Yeah.
But what you just said is exactly what I'm looking for. It needs to have AA orders above that VWAP.
No, it's just that I find it like weird because if they were gonna do that, like why is it struggling here? But like you said, it's like let's see if it holds.
I mean, it's totally possible that they're still accumulating their shares, you know?
Mm,
Like, so they won't want to push it up quite yet. That or they're waiting for more demand come through. I don't exactly know, but ooh, I like. Yeah, you're right, Cody. But the way I see it though is the longer the consolidation though, the bigger the explosion will be in the end. So I don't mind because it's
Oh wait,
the longer
yeah,
consolidation, it's holding it's trapping more people. You
yeah.
know,
It it might be coming up now, I think.
high or low. So let's watch. Looking pretty okay here. A little bit strong. So when we see the A orders above that VWAP, we need follow through of that because if there's no follow through of green with the purple, they'll just fall back down again.
Yeah.
Nice, let's go. More pushing.
Oh.
Still struggling in that VWAP, but it's hugging it, so let's see.
Yeah, I see some red, but it's not going down that much.
Still early to tell, but yeah, hopefully they push it. If I win this long, feel free to call me Eddie 2.0. The new but not so improved Eddie. So still struggled there, but let's see. The buyer looks like it did step up though. So this might be the break right here. Nice. There's the A orders. Okay. We need follow through right now. There's the follow through. Let's go, baby.
Nice. Nice.
Average is 334. Could have made it a lot better in the 320s, but I was too nervous to add more size. Now I want to see VWAP hold and then push up from there. There you go. It looked like VWAP held there. There you
Nice.
go. More green, but no follow through yet. So I'm also expecting it to be more of a grinder because it's high float. So any like huge squeezes is not very feasible, I think. I'm risking 330 now, so that's only 4 cent risk. So I'm pretty comfortable now. Your QD's working, Christian. That's nice. What's your stop loss there? Oh, that was lame.
Yeah, they refreshing bit. 36 was getting hammered, but they kept refreshing it.
Yeah, I looked away. It looks like now they trapped the top, and now they're trapping the bottom. Actually, hold on. This could be bad. Big one.
Germany unified in 1871 and straight away they became one of the most powerful nations in the world. But in doing so, Germany unified in 1871 and straight away they became one of the most powerful nations in the world. But in doing so, they took Alsace-Lorraine from France and created an enemy there. People on both sides of the border believed that war was inevitable and therefore worked to form alliances accordingly. So plans focused on Europe early on, and the idea of Mittel Europa was already an idea before the unification. The meaning of this changed over time, but it was essentially the idea that the middle of Europe should be united under German rule or German-speaking rule. I say German-speaking because before Prussia defeated the Austrians in 1866, there was the idea of uniting a greater Germany. But the German desire to control the middle of Europe goes right the way back. In fact, as far back as the Crusades, when the Teutonic Order took control of the Baltic region. Then the Hanseatic League, an early trading bloc, pushed German settlers around the continent. In fact, you could find huge German communities everywhere, and they were instrumental in building many of Europe's capitals, like Stockholm, which was 1/3 German back in the Middle Ages. Then 40% of Riga still spoke German in the middle of the 19th century, despite being under Russian control, and in the south they settled in Bratislava, Slovenia, and even found
Yeah, that was way weak.
in the mountains of Transylvania. This expansion of German influence actually has a name, Ostiegelung, which means eastern settling. And this, as I said, goes back to
QD
medieval
pop.
times. Then, from the 18th century,
Above 2.
Germans began to explore racial superiority
QD.
with
Let me see.
Ostforschung, which just means the research of the East. And they came to the conclusion that they brought civilization to the Polish in particular, and you can see how this developed into Mittel Europa, and of course, later on, Libya.
Oh,
So,
that's true.
in the end, they brought civilization to the
Yeah, I got out of that already. it kind of pissed me off, but y'all were right about how like it was like accumulating.
You had a good average on that at least.
Yeah.
Are you trading ILAG, Cody? Figured you were. What's the average on that? Okay. That's really good. Oh, my bagel.
Polish in particular, and you can see how this developed into Middle Europa and, of course, later on, Lebensraum. So, in the end, the Germans would then have influence over a range of ethnicities in Central Europe, but the German Empire was initially led by Bismarck, who hoped to achieve a balance of power and prevent diplomatic isolation. So he signed the League of Three Emperors with Russia and Austria, thus isolating France, their natural enemy. Within his borders, though, he believed that the Germans should hammer the Poles until they despaired of living. But internationally, he would act as an umpire. He didn't seek out colonies, believing that they would be more expensive than they were worth, and he actively championed French colonial pursuits like in Tunisia, hoping that it would distract them from affairs in Europe. But first, seeing as though you're here watching this video, I'm going to assume that you're curious by nature and a fan of bite-sized information, James, but to undermine the anti-club of the German Empire. So all was therefore peaceful until in 1884 he sort of quickly changed his mind on colonies. No one really knows why. It could be because more Germans were demanding them for prestige, or he hoped to undermine the anti-colonial liberals in the Reichstag. But either way, Germany entered the colonial game. Before this, there were some German colonial attempts going right the way back to the Age of Exploration. The Welser family got the rights to colonize Venezuela from the King of Spain. In 1685, Brandenburg leased St. Thomas from Denmark for a little while, and they also had a colony in West Africa. Potentially the most famous strange colonial power was Courland, which created New Courland on the island of Tobago. This small duchy was a vassal of Poland, but it was a German-led state, a remnant of the old Livonian order. Even the tiny county of Hanau tried to buy Dutch Guiana and create
Hi along, ADN.
Before to the 19th century,
View up attempt
the
again.
United States, which had united into the German Confederation, began to look out again. For instance, the Hamburg Colonial Society looked to buy Chatham Islands off the coast of New Zealand, but this, by the way, like other colonial pursuits, was seen as a way to deal with Germany's emigration problem, as thousands were leaving every year to the Americas, only to lose their culture and connections on arrival. Others believed that they should create German colonies within other countries, and the new Republic of Texas proved to be a tempting target for the Germans, just as it did with the Belgians.
Low float SSR. Seems like a headache. Recent IPO too.
But it was mismanaged and failed. Similar voyages and inquiries were made in South America, especially in Argentina. However, at this time, state-sponsored colonialism was being led by the Austrians, as they sent out ships to take control of the Nicobar Islands in 1858. This all came about during the reunification period, so the Germans were deciding on who would lead the charge, the Austrians or the Prussians. The Prussians sent Count Fritz zu Eulenburg on a voyage to Asia in 1860, and he quickly met with the British and French to discuss the possibility of colonizing Formosa. The Western powers actually agreed with this idea, but in the end,
There's the
Louis
push.
managed to agree on trade deals with the Asian nations, as he just didn't have the men to
No
occupy them.
follow through yet.
Otherwise, under Bismarck's leadership, colonies were once again just outright rejected. Like in the 1860s, the Sultan of the Sulu Islands offered to put his lands under Prussian protection. The Sultan of Vituland in Africa did the same, and in 1867, the commander of the warship Augusta negotiated with the president of Costa Rica terms to create a navy
Weak.
base. But Bismarck refused them all. Also, the King of Denmark, after his war with Prussia, was on the verge of losing Schleswig, so he offered to join the German Confederation and hand over Iceland to the Prussians. But this was all refused, and Iceland wouldn't really pop up in any of the future plans again. Even the Dutch offered Bismarck a base in their
Ooh, let's
Caribbean
go.
islands, but again this was rejected.
What are you looking
because
at?
he didn't want to anger the Americans by
ADN.
challenging their Monroe Doctrine. However,
Are you in
as
it?
I said, in
Yeah.
1884, Bismarck changed
What's
the
your
name
at?
of
Guam?
and the pursuit began.
Yeah, it's
Luckily for him,
336.
private Germans had
Oh, dang.
already been on the
Like
Pacific
I was
colonies.
risking like
Nachtigal in Togoland, Carl
Like,
Peters in Tanzania,
basically, like,
Jackson from Marlin in
330.
Cameroon, and Luderitz
Okay.
in Namibia. These, however, obviously
'Cause,
were
like-
You have to show me your entries later.
like even though like it's like trappy and it keeps going down, like because of that, like I'm like holding it anyway, cause it's really like zigzaggy, you know.
Okay.
of expansion. Like in 1885,
Wow, Cody.
Nagel arrived in
You were
South
getting the
Africa,
top tick on all that stuff though.
colony in
That's pretty nice.
Rwanda and St. Lucia Bay in Zululand. In
And you were
Guinea,
covering some as it washed. That's
and
cool.
in
That's cool.
Nigeria,
So you still make green on this probably.
tried to claim Mahinland. Carl Peters also made his way up to Uganda and signed a treaty with the leaders.
Yeah, dude. Nice scalping.
These other colonies were used more as pawns in the larger game, and often Bismarck handed them away for recognition. of
Don't
his
remember who
respect.
said it, but frontside shorts need a frontside collar.
Exactly, exactly.
Well
In
done.
1885, they actually signed a couple of treaties with local
Was it
peoples,
Bao?
but the claims overlapped with the Italians and the
Probably,
British,
probably.
so were subsequently.
Bao, is he from Twitter?
Yet, as they
Yeah,
expanded
MIC.
their colonies, a whole
Ah.
new concept began to emerge: Middle Africa.
Cool, cool, cool.
Just like Middle Europa, they hoped to claim the middle of the continent. Belgian Congo would be.
Are you in anything, Max?
But what else would have been included?
No, not
is
yet.
sort of up for debate. Later on, Caprivi would negotiate for
What are you
South
looking
Africa
at?
to be expanded.
To see to get into.
Yeah, still ADN.
Via Zambia and the
Okay.
I missed the entry on EVTL at 5. I'm so hesitant.
Portugal, who they believed were too weak to
Ah,
have such large colonial.
You still have to warm up, bro.
Further afield, some Germans began looking
Two.
into the possibility of setting up colonies in the Pacific Islands. The German New Guinea Company sailed almost in secret to the Pacific and began creating colonies.
Ooh, EVTL was a nice.
New Guinea, which was
Like-
supposed to become almost like
And no
Portugal,
pop, nothing, just fade.
a rich plantation colony. The
Yeah,
Germans also
dude.
began taking some islands off Spain, like the Marshall Islands and the Carolinas.
Other stuff, are you serious?
Spanish at this point, though, were in a state of decline, and they could do very little about
We're gonna
it.
know this
In
stuff.
fact, when it came to the Marshall Islands, the Pope actually mediated and granted it to the Germans. Samoa, though, could have caused more problems. There, a civil war saw the Germans and Americans both back
Whatever.
claim
As long as it makes high lows.
and to make matters more complicated, the British also sought concessions in the country. This all resulted in a standoff between the German and American navies in the late 1880s, but war was prevented as a cyclone destroyed both fleets. The three powers then agreed to divide Samoa between themselves, and this was cemented after another civil war the following decade. However, Bismarck's desire for colonies was short-lived, and in the late 1880s he gave up on pursuing them, allegedly offering them to Crispi of Italy, who responded, "Your Highness, I am quite prepared to sell you ours." But by then, Wilhelm II was Kaiser, and in 1890 Bismarck resigned. Wilhelm and his new Chancellor Caprivi then set about pursuing a far more ambitious colonial and foreign policy called Weltpolitik or world politics. But the same year, the treaty with the Russians wasn't renewed.
Nice weakness here on ILAG.
Risk of a
Let's see.
war on two fronts, and the Germans antagonized the Russians by temporarily claiming Bear Island in 1899. But the Russians soon sent warships and claimed it for themselves. Yet the Kaiser's real focus early on was Asia. He's actually credited with coming up with the term Yellow Peril and had pictures made showing Europeans uniting to crush a dreadful Buddha. But to claim colonies out in Asia, he needed more coaling stations, and one he looked at early on was
Refreshing that 410.
which he leased from the Ottomans. This, however, was given back
Oh,
to them
bam.
when it went unused.
Didn't do
for
squat,
50
though.
years. Then, despite his fear of Asian nations, German warships were still sold to China, and advisors worked alongside the Japanese. They watched on as Japan crushed China in the First Sino-Japanese War and took Taiwan. The Kaiser then joined with the French and Russians in stepping in to prevent the Japanese from also taking Port Arthur. The Kaiser, after all, didn't want an Asian country to become too powerful. But also nearby, Shandong became the focus of German colonization efforts almost immediately. For a couple of years, the Germans were eyeing up other locations, like Zhoushan Island, and they even thought of sharing Taiwan.
410 again.
But then Admiral Alfred von Trippitz had toured Shandong and declared that it would be a good location for a future naval base. German missionaries were then killed in the Juyi incident,
Weak.
and this
Weak.
gave the Kaiser the opportunity to move in. In fact, the leader of the East Asian fleet, Otto von Dietrich, said, "May incidents be exploited in pursuit of further goals." Or, in other words, can he exploit this opportunity to take a colony? So troops landed in China and seized Kiaochao Bay. They forced the Chinese to lease the port for 99 years, similar to British Hong Kong, and they essentially placed Shandong under their influence. They were allowed to mine the area and build railroads, and, like Prince Heinrich of Prussia said, railroads would spread German culture and German conscientious devotion to duty. Afterwards, Wilhelm himself declared, "Hundreds of German merchants will rejoice at the realization that the German Empire has at last won a firm footing in Asia. Hundreds of thousands of Chinamen will tremble when they feel the iron fist of the German Empire heavy on their necks." This then subsequently panicked the other powers, while many saw the opportunity to seek out colonies for themselves. China was set to be divided up had it not been for John Hay, the Secretary of State in the United States. He got the Europeans to promise to uphold the open door policy of China, and they all largely agreed. Britain and Germany, for instance, signed the Yangtze Agreement shortly afterwards. But it should be said by 1900, German Shandong was tiny compared to the claims of the other powers, and the British even secured a port there themselves. So Germany was losing the scramble, so they just made do with their small port city. Plus, that same year, the Boxer Rebellion broke out, and the great powers united to crush them. It is from this war, though, that the Germans got the nickname Hun, because the Kaiser gave a speech to his men saying, "Prisoners will not be taken, just as 1,000 years ago the Huns under their king Etzel made a name for themselves, so may the name Germany be affirmed by you in such a way in China." But China wasn't their only failure in the East. For a long time they had been scouting out the Spanish Philippines. So when the Spanish-American War broke out, Otto von Dietrich had sent ships to the Philippines, believing he could secure a chunk of the newly independent country, ideally Sulu, Mindanao and Palawan. However, this just encouraged the Americans to take over the islands for themselves, believing, probably correctly, that the Germans would just move in straight away. And keeping on America, on the other side of the world, the Navy had been scouting out the possibility of securing a naval base in some colonies somewhere in the Caribbean. But the Monroe Doctrine was making this next one possible, but that's not to say they didn't try. One of the most interesting colonization attempts in the Americas, though, was in the jungles of Paraguay, where Bernard Foster and his wife, who was the sister of Nietzsche, created Nueva Germania in 1888. Foster was an anti-Semite, and he hoped this colony would be a homeland for pure-blood Aryans. However, it completely failed. There were other more serious attempts to find a colony in the Americas, though, like the Hamburg American Steamship Line, which was sometimes the largest passenger line in the world, had a coaling station in Danish St. Thomas. But the Americans again were worried that the Kaiser would purchase the island, so they just bought it for themselves. In 1896, though, Wilhelm did actually have the opportunity to take St. Thomas and St. John, but only in exchange for part of North Schleswig, so in 72. Then, in 1914, just before the war, the Germans threatened to seize the custom houses in Haiti if debts weren't paid. This, again though, was used as a sort of justification for the Americans intervening in the country the next year. But as for other targets in the Caribbean, defaulted all sent ships to blockade the country with Venezuela, Colombia model, an informal empire dominating trade and expanding culture. And they did find a possible ally in Chile. At the end of the century, they were involved in a bit of an arms race with Argentina, and they employed Germans to train and equip their army. But this period was actually described by a local as German bewitchment. And still today, if you see the Chilean army on parade, you see clear similarities with Imperial Germany. So Chile, at least, was a possible ally. As for investment, the Germans were almost equal to the British and Americans when it came to spending in Venezuela, Paraguay, and Brazil. In 19...
What are you risking, Christian?
The Platt Amendment forbidding
I'm risking 330.
Nice. Me too.
You
Risking
know,
that relative low.
you know what this is reminding me of though? Like some of these like gap and extensions, like they just go sideways for a long time and then just dump. So like
It's either
I
that
don't know.
or it pushes at the end.
Yeah, I don't know which one it is.
It's okay. You have your risk. Stick with it.
Yeah.
transferring land to a foreign power. As for Wilhelm, he often criticized the Anglophone world, angry at the Anglo-American Limited Company for international theft and worldwide incitement. And even Bismarck would describe the Monroe Doctrine as a brand of arrogance that is uniquely American. But he also believed that when it would be tested, the whole idea would
There
crumble.
it is again.
So you might see where this is going. The Germans believed that knocking America out of the world stage would serve their interests, and as such, there were plans made to launch a speedy attack on the United States and open the Americas up to colonization. For instance, the German ambassador, Theodor von Helleben, warned the Kaiser about growing suspicion in the United States, but the Kaiser responded, "Tell them to control themselves. Whatever is necessary for the Navy will be done, even if it displeases the Yankees." And he even wrote a dispatch to Roosevelt saying, "The Russians are sitting tight there. No, South America is our goal, old boy." So between 1898 and 1903, 3 plans were made to attack the US. This, by the way, was only possible thanks to the Tirpitz Plan, which dramatically increased the size of the German Navy. The first plan was to defeat the American Navy and then bombard Norfolk and Portsmouth shipyards, which were apparently the most sensitive point along the American coast. But this was also around the same time that the Americans defeated the Spanish, and the German Navy wasn't strong enough then. So they waited a year and came up with a new, bolder plan. This one would have 60 warships protect the movement of 100,000 soldiers. They would actually land and advance onto New York and Boston. As Manhattan was shelled, the Americans would make peace, and Germany would be free to take over Puerto Rico and Cuba. But this plan was again shelved, as many just thought it was impossible. So a third plan was made. This time they would take Puerto Rico, threatening the newly built Panama Canal, and then they'd bombard New York, or at least threaten to. However, by this point, the Americans had proved that they were willing to defend the Monroe Doctrine after the Venezuelan crisis, and in 1904, the Entente Cordiale was signed. This completely refocused the Kaiser's attention, as Germany was becoming more and more isolated within Europe. Then, during the Boer War, many Germans had volunteered to fight against the British, and beforehand, there was the infamous Kruger telegram when the Kaiser congratulated the President of the Transvaal Republic. Later on, the Kaiser would, in a bid to draw Britain away from their new allies, come up with some bold claims in an interview with the Times, like suggesting the Russians and French wanted to use the opportunity to humiliate England to the dust, and he said that he suggested plans to the English that helped them win the war. But there were still reports of funds going to the Boers from German Namibia. However, South Africa was a future target for Wilhelm, as secretary of the time, warning him, Japan and Britain. He believed France was keen, but so too were the Netherlands and Belgium, at least after the Kaiser threatened military action if they were to remain neutral. The same threats applied to Denmark, which the Kaiser believed should be occupied to shore up their own defences in case of war. The Russians, on the other hand, believed such a coalition was impossible, as France hated Germany, caused by enemies, all suspicious of their activity. In this climate, the Kaiser decided to look further afield for allies. And as a side note, Teddy Roosevelt probably described the Kaiser best to the English, saying, "I cannot, of course, follow or take too seriously a man whose policy is one of such violent and often wholly irrational zigzags," meaning, in other words, he bounced from one idea to another. So he went from hating the United States and fearing Asians to trying to form an alliance with China and the United States. He wrote to Bülow, "My insurance treaty with Theodore Roosevelt, who was afraid of the Japanese, would be appropriate and worthy of consideration." Hermann Speck von Sternberg met with Roosevelt, and apparently the US president said, "If Japan invades America with powerful forces, our army will first suffer a crushing blow. Japan's army will be annihilated if she is left in America, and America will take her revenge." To get to the United States, though, they both theorized that the Japanese could use Mexico as a base for an invasion. This means the Kaiser and the Americans expected that a major war wouldn't come from the Balkans, but from Japan. The Kaiser initially believed Japan, Russia, and maybe France would seek to partition China, and of course Germany and America would intervene on behalf of their Asian ally. As for Britain, Roosevelt said, "I do not think that she would intervene in such a war. England knows that in such a case, we would invade Canada." As for China, Yuan Shikai supported the alliance, and the Kaiser said, "The Chinese have more self-respect than the Spanish, Portuguese, and French. We must strengthen their backs and not betray their confidence. I am very much for this." But the German ambassadors have more. England, as for Britain, of course Germany and America would intervene on behalf of their Asian ally. As for Britain, Roosevelt said, "I do not think that she would intervene in such a war. England knows that in such a case, we would invade Canada." As for China, Yuan Shikai supported the alliance, and the Kaiser said, "The Chinese have more self-respect than the Spanish, Portuguese, and French. We must strengthen their backs, have more self-respect than the Spanish, Portuguese, and French. We must strengthen their backs and not betray their confidence. I am very much for this." But the German ambassador for China, Count von Rex, came up with a new proposal. Keeping the secret understanding with the Americans, he tried to entice the Russians into this alliance. As he said, Russia would be allowed an entirely free hand, not only in Mongolia and East Turkestan, but also in Manchuria and Korea. Through this agreement, she would receive far more than the Japanese-French-English group has ever been induced to grant. But the Japanese quickly signed a treaty of friendship with the United States, Yuan Shikai was removed from his post, and the alliance died before it was born. The Kaiser still backed the idea of supporting China. Whether the Japanese or anyone else pulls a long face about it doesn't matter in the least. But he continued saying his dealings everywhere were challenged. Like the Brazilian president Francesca has asked me for German officers, and France has made a fuss about it. The Turks have bought ships from us. England, France, Russia threw a fit. China and Turkey are the only two countries that trust us and where we can still accomplish anything. Both must be supported by all, including financial means against England's policy of financially encircling Germany. So the Ottoman Empire was the next target to at least form an alliance with. And Wilhelm actually took a trip to the Levant and became infatuated with the Middle Eastern Islam. He wrote to the Tsar, "If I had come there without any religion at all, I certainly would have turned Mohammedan." There was actually talk across the Middle East that the Kaiser had actually converted and would be a sort of saviour of Islam, or at least would free Muslims from European rule. The Ottomans, even after the Young Turk Revolution, were quick to accept German assistance in modernising their country, and instrumental to this was the Baghdad-Berlin Railroad. This would have brought German influence right into the Middle East, provide them with a route into the Indian Ocean, bypassing the Suez Canal, and challenge the British in
You can see it dumping
the
there.
Persian Gulf and beyond. Now this trip did provide some hope to a cause you probably wouldn't expect. As the Daily
This pushes up. Range is tightening.
results, if
Then it
not
might-
the most important
it might be pouring up now.
to Palestine is the immense impetus it has given Zionism. When the Kaiser
But-
visited Constantinople, Dr.
I believe they
Phillips
float
told him the
rotated.
Zionist movement was there.
Oh, they did?
When the Kaiser visited Jerusalem,
Well, at least Finvisit at least says 25 mil and they traded 40 mil now.
particularly keen on the idea of Zionism, but during the Great War,
25 now.
prominent
Okay.
Zionists will be pushing forward.
Yeah, dilution tracker says 39.23.
But
And
I
then
believe
80
even
Edge to trade
was the
says
movement to create German colonies in Palestine. The German Association of the Holy Land was created at the end of the century.
26.41.
and they created colony mind and constantly changes. They challenged
So
the
they
French
somewhere
government
rotated
to
in
go
that
more
range between
open to the
30,
idea
well,
of
40 and
regional agreements
30,
made
or 25 and 40.
Hmm.
Those two stuffs at 38, 938 and 1021
Zelensky has called on foreigners
looks a
from all
bit
over the world to join
worrisome, but
Foreign Legion, and it seems
strange that they didn't dump more from there.
from Japan, USA,
Yeah, now that the 200 EMA is coming too,
have joined in the fight.
I'm
On
feeling
the other
more
side,
long
we
biased.
heard that the Syrians and even some from Central African Republic have declared their willingness to join the Russians in Ukraine. Obviously, foreigners participating in wars is nothing new. In the Yugoslav wars, for instance, far-right Europeans joined the Croatians.
I was gonna see if that candle, just the candle now, is like gonna keep going down to 320s, but it went back up to 330, so I didn't cut yet.
Some from Central African Republic. Zelensky has called on
Swear now, it's the really long channel.
Ukrainian Foreign Legion, and it seems to have worked. Thousands of people from Japan, USA, UK, India, Brazil, and all
Yeah,
sorts of countries
there it is.
have joined in the fight against Putin. On the other side, you may have probably
It is
heard that
microgapping now,
Syrians and
though,
even some
so-
from Central African Republic have declared their willingness to join the Russians in Ukraine. Obviously, foreigners participating in wars is nothing new. In the Yugoslav wars, for instance, far-right Europeans joined the Croatians, Islamists joined the Bosnians, and Russians joined the Serbs. But there are strange stories from all sorts of conflicts, where people from far distant corners of the world unite to fight alongside each other. But first, lapses in security are clearly very important. Cybercriminals are getting more and more skilled and pose a greater pass, however, in a bun, and it's nordpass.com. Secure yourself. Interesting foreign legions, we could go straight to World War II and discuss the Indians serving in the Nazi army, or even the Russian emigres who served alongside the Japanese. Then of course the Spanish Civil War obviously had volunteers come from across the globe, but I feel that there's already a lot on them. But one from more recent history I'd like to highlight is the Islamic Legion, which was created by Gaddafi in the 1970s. He hoped to create an army of 1 million fighters with the goal of liberating Palestine, of toppling the reactionary regimes, of annihilating the borders, gates and barriers between the countries of the Arab homeland, and of creating
For real,
a single
though.
Arab Jamahiriya from the ocean to the Gulf. Most of
Dude,
the fighters
it's
came
so
from the
nice.
poorer countries south of Libya, like Mali, Niger and the likes, but they were humiliated in the conflict with Chad in the 1980s and were disbanded in disgrace. However, I believe the 19th century and early 20th century had some of the most interesting foreign legions, like in the Second Boer War. The Boer struggle inspired a number of foreigners to join them. Germans and Dutch, who shared a common ancestry, flocked to South Africa, and this included Cornelis van Gogh, the brother of the painter. Then there were a number of Irish, Americans, French and even Scandinavians. But probably the strangest there were the Russians. These Russians were keen supporters of the Boer cause, not only because of their mutual enemy, but also because they believed that they shared similar values. As Tolstoy wrote in his diary, "Opening a paper every morning, I passionately wish to read that the Boers have beaten the British. It cheers my soul." Over 200 volunteered to fight against the British, and one of the first to arrive was Nico Bagriatoni, who was actually a Georgian nobleman, but born within the Russian Empire. He was given the title of Nico the Boar and promoted to the rank of colonel. But he did admit he didn't actually hear of Transvaal before the war, but once he did, he viewed it as his homeland. Another well-known adventurer was Yevgeny Maximov, who spent his life fighting in conflicts around the world, trying to remove the dishonor of being discharged from the army for attempting suicide. People from this upper class of Russian society wrongly convinced the Boers that they were able to influence the Tsar and could bring Russia into the war. But remember, this was less than 2 decades before the Russian Revolution, so there were some future Bolsheviks among the ranks as well, fighting against an imperial power. So princes and Bolsheviks fought side by side. Plus, on Nico the Boar, he was first exiled to St. Helena, then freed to return home. But he strangely managed to survive the Soviet purges and lived in Tbilisi with no money, selling cigarettes in his royal attire. Plus, his daughter Irina would join the French resistance during World War II, so there's an interesting life there. Also, the Russians were joined by the Poles, who also saw a connection between themselves and the Boers. During carnivals, they would sing Boer national anthems in Warsaw, shops had pictures of their leaders in the windows, and some people even dressed in their clothes. In the Warsaw Gazette, they captured the romantic image shared by men.
QD.
A Boer is a gallant and persistent warrior. From a young age, he knows how to handle a weapon.
Oh
and doesn't
dang,
fear any
QD.
danger. He spends his whole life
Seems like
hunting,
everything
cultivating,
else is going
farming,
up, up except the stock
He
I
enjoys
thought
wide
was going to go
open
up.
spaces and gets ill in the city. He loves his country, which he conquered with his own blood, and will defend with his own blood. And over 200 of them would go.
Nice, dude. What was... You probably got QD at that shelf, though, didn't you? 210 from 215, 219, or whatever? Gotcha. On that second pop. That looks like a really nice shelf.